to today's event. I'm David Weinstein. I'm the director of the Center on Japanese Economy and Business here at Columbia Business School, and the Carlos Shoup Professor of the Japanese Economy at Columbia University. We're delighted that you've joined us here, and we've got a packed room to hear Randall Jones talk about a strategy to address Japan's declining fertility rate. Before turning it over to Randy, I just want to say a few words about the center. It was established in 1986 by Professor Shoup, who is actually in our front row over here. And its mission was to promote knowledge and understanding of the Japanese economy in a global context. And we continue to grow through events such as this, through webinars, seminars, and big conferences and other activities. Let me now turn it over to Randy Jones. He is a research associate here at CJEB and an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University in SAIS, and is perhaps most well known for being a former senior counselor for East Asia and head of the Japan and Korea desks at the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Randy came and spoke to us in 2022. It was a really great talk. I learned a lot. I've never seen someone get through as many slides as that, but get through them very clearly. So, hold on to your hats. We're in for something really, really tremendous. For the sake of time, I just want to say a few other things about Randy, just very briefly. You have a detailed bio. Randy was at the OECD for 30 years and wrote all of the 16 economic surveys of Japan, of Korea, and 15 for Japan that appeared over that time period. So certainly for me, these surveys are incredibly valuable documents explaining what's going on in these countries. And so I'm delighted to have Randy back here to talk to us today. Before joining the OECD, he spent 3 years in the U.S. government, serving at the Council of Economic Advisors and as an advisor in the State Department. He also received the Decoration of the Order of the Rising Sun from the government of Japan in 2016. This is Japan's oldest award, founded in 1875, I believe, by Emperor Meiji. And then also received the Sungni Medal of the Order of Diplomatic Service Merit from the government of Korea in 2018. Lastly, before I turn the microphone over to Randy, I want to just take a moment to thank our corporate and individual sponsors who are listed in the booklet that you have for their generous donations. We do not receive any support from the university, so we live off the kindness of our corporate sponsors and individual sponsors. And so I just want to thank you all very much for all of that support. So Randy's going to talk for a bit, and then we're going to have a time for question and answers. So now we're just going to turn it over to you. You can speak from here.
I'm so happy to be here again. It reminds me of my year here in New York. And thanks you, David, for the introduction. I'm so happy to see Hugh Patrick, the founder of CJEB. Just tell a personal story. I started my undergraduate work, and I spent 2 years in Korea. And I thought, what should I study? I'm fascinated by Asia. This was the 1970s, and everyone wanted to be a lawyer. Something to do with Watergate. And so I thought, I could be a lawyer, but it seems so boring. This doesn't seem fun. I don't want to insult any lawyers here, but it didn't seem interesting to me. And I took a class on Asian economics, and the book was Asians Do a Giant by Hugh Patrick. So I thought, wow, this is fascinating. Somebody who's making a living doing this, I think I'll do that. And so if I have any advice as an old person to you, find something you really like to do and then you'll want to do it forever. And I'm 68, and this is more fun than ever. So I'm going to just keep on doing this as long as I can. So today, I'm going to talk about the fertility issue and the demographic problems. And so there's basically a few main points I just want to summarize at the beginning. If we look at current fertility rates, employment, and immigration rates, Japan's population would fall by 45% by the end of the century to 68 million, and employment by 52% to 32 million. And such demographic changes, such large changes, will have severe economic, social, and physical impacts. The low and falling fertility is driven by economic factors, partly the financial insecurity of young people and the cost of raising children, and also social forces, pressure that especially women face in trying to combine employment with having a family. Prime Minister Kishida has made this a priority, trying to reverse the fall in the fertility rate. He wants to create a children-first economic society. However, the government's 1.8 fertility target sounds very challenging. And even if we meet that, we would still face a 36% drop in the labor force. So even if we manage to achieve this, what seems impossible. And so we have to accompany fertility policy by measures to try to reduce challenges for labor market participation by women, by older people, and by foreign workers. And even without a hike in the fertility rate, if we could boost these three groups, then we could keep the population and the employment level around 40 million. And finally, something I won't really go into this time, but the key policy really is to boost productivity. That's the key change in trying to face demographic change. So these slides will be eventually on the website, so I don't feel like I have to copy this down. Like David said, I'm from the OECD, and we have statistics on everything, and I like that to show what we know. So I'm going to talk first about the demographic situation, the policies on fertility, and the labor market opportunities for women, older people, foreign workers, and then briefly conclude. So this is the overall scenario that we ran. So this assumes that fertility stays about 1.3. The immigration inflows, say about 100,000 net, and the employment rates by gender and age groups stay the same. So we go down to about 68 million in population, 32 million in employment. If you look at elderly dependency, how many elderly compared to the working age, in Japan, it's already the highest among OECD countries, over 50%, and it's going to go higher to about 80%. So that means we now have about 2 people of working age for every elderly, and by 2050, it will be 1.2 people of working age for every elderly. Other countries face similar problems. Korea, much of what I say today, it concerns my second country, Korea. There's very many similarities in the problems and the customs and policies of the government. And in Europe, we have countries like Italy, which will also approach Japan in terms of the elderly dependency ratio. In terms of the speed of aging, the United Nations says 14% become an elderly society. So Japan went from 7% in 1970, 24 years to get to 14%. That transition took 72 years in the US, 115 years in France, and then Japan just took 12 years to get to an extremely elderly population of 20%. Japan's not alone. Korea and Japan face even faster demographic transitions. So this is a problem that's not limited to Japan, and I think watching Japan's policies, how they react, will be a good guide to other countries facing the similar problems. So if we look at the fertility rate, it used to be before World War II, just after the war, it had a very high rate, and then it fell quickly towards 2, and it's been edging down again since 2015. So last year, it was down to 1.26, which is the lowest in Japanese history. OECD average, the 38 countries in the OECD, is 1.6, and other countries in Asia are actually lower than Japan. You look at, I think Singapore, I think is 1.1, Taiwan is 1.0, Hong Kong 0.9, and Korea 0.78. So this isn't just a Japan problem; it's really an East Asia problem as well as an advanced country problem. So what are the long-run problems of having declining fertility rate, declining population? Well, you have some advantages: less pressure on the environment, less greenhouse gas emissions, less congestion, less expensive housing. But when you have a decline in the working age population relative to the elderly, that puts downward pressure on per capita GDP and living standards. You have huge fiscal challenges because you have to spend a lot more on health and long-term care. Health is basically a program for people over 65, most of the spending. And then you have pensions as well. And so even by 2040, the government's estimate that spending on pensions, long-term care, and health will be rise by 2.7% of GDP. For a country that always has a chronic deficit, that's a difficult situation. On the other hand, fewer children means fewer expenses on children. One shocking figure to me is that every year in Japan, an average of 450 public schools permanently close because there's not enough students. So Prime Minister Kishida has made this a priority. If we don't have enough people, we won't be able to supply services. In many parts of Japan, even within 1 or 2 hours of Tokyo, are turning into ghost towns. So they can't supply the long-term care, the health care that older people need. So this is a real social problem. And older men and women without families will have less well-being and financial support. Now let me talk about what can we do to try to raise fertility. I start as an economist recognizing that there are many social trends that might not have so much to do with economics. There are people nowadays maybe focus more on self-realization, on wealth, on other issues, and they don't really focus on the traditional ideas of having a family. So Japan has been addressing this issue for quite a while now. In 1989, we had the 1.57 shock when fertility fell to 1.57. So the government introduced an angel plan, and then a new angel plan, and the key point was to increase childcare. And then the other most important things would be making employment environment more flexible, the sixth item, and trying to change gender roles in the workplace, trying to change the culture of the working society. And then we had more changes after that. In 2010, there was a child allowance introduced, 5,000 yen to 10,000 yen per month, which isn't a lot, about $100. And then the Abe administration increased childcare again by a large amount, by 790,000 spots. And then they made free childhood education and care for the 3 to 5 year children. And then they set a target of raising share of parents of men who take parental leave up to 13%. So these are the policies they made. They didn't really have much impact. As I mentioned, the fertility has been going down, especially since 2015. And so Kishida came into office and he started talking a lot about fertility. And I just took a few of his quotes that really struck me. He said, quote, "In giving thought to the sustainability and inclusiveness of our nation's economy and society, we place child-rearing support as our most important policy." Then he said, "We must create a children-first economic society and reverse the birth rate decline." He said, "This is a now or never time. We have to do it now or it's going to be too late." He said, "The next 6 to 7 years are our last chance to see if we can reverse the fertility trend." The target set by government in 2020, which is a renewal of what Abe said, is 1.8. That's the target fertility rate. So President Kishida has made this a priority. He talked about spending a lot of money on it, perhaps as much as 1% of GDP. But we also talked about doubling defense spending from 1% to 2%. So in a country with a desperate, very bad financial situation, fiscal situation, spending 2% more GDP on military and fertility, plus the ongoing rise in healthcare, long-term care pensions, it increases the fiscal challenge. So why is that so urgent? Well, this is the chart the government showed when he said it's urgent. In the last decade of the 1990s, the number of children born fell by 2.3% compared to the previous decade. In the first decade of this century, the decline was 10%. In 2010 to 20, the decline was 22%. So you can see a trend. And if this continues, the number of babies born will drop very rapidly. So in 2022, there were, I think, about 800,000 babies born. It was 2.7 million in 1947 after World War II. So 800,000 babies, that's less than in 1899. And it's only half as much as the deaths in Japan. So you can see why the population will be falling. So what is behind all this? Well, we can start with childlessness. So among women age 50, there's a growing share have never had any children. So it's not a question of people not wanting to have 2 children. It's a question of a large share of women not having any children. So the share not having any children in 2005, it was about 12%, and now it's 27%. So women are choosing not to get married partly because of this difficulty in combining work and family. So if we look at the share of 50-year-olds who have never been married, it used to be below 5%. Marriage was almost obligatory. And now about 28% of men the age of 50 have never been married, and about 18% of women. So it's acceptable now not to get married. So why are people not getting married and having children? Well, first of all, people ask, why do you talk about marriage? Well, in Japan, 98% of children are born within marriage. And so if we want to make a sudden change, we're going to have to take away the obstacles that make people not want to get married. In other countries, as I mentioned, people have other goals. People want to achieve other goals besides having families. In a survey this is the National Institute of Population and Social Security Research, in 2021, more than 80% of men in their 18 to 34 age group said they do want to get married, and they want to have an average of 1.8 children. So in theory, young people still want to create families. But when the government asked, what's stopping you from getting married? The most common response was 42% being financially comfortable. They're not financially stable enough to try to create a family. Another 10% cited the challenge of finding housing. On some, for young people, the problem is the uncertainty about the employment prospects. And also, if they do find a job, they might be working such long hours, they might not even have much time to think about dating and finding someone. So we have a problem in trying to promote family formation. So there's a tight link between income and marriage. If you look at men age 30 to 34, the blue line on the left-hand side, if they're making 7 to 8 million yen per year, then like 35 to 39, I guess the green line, that 80% would be married. And if they're only making 1 to 1.5 million, only 30% are married. So there's a very tight correlation. And also on the right-hand side, men in their 40s with low income, see what the small share that they get married. So this financial instability is a key problem. So how can we improve the financial position of young people? Well, first basic principle in the government's program in June of this year, or March of this year, was to increase the income of the young generation. And they didn't give any ideas in this document. Maybe they'll have some more. But my view would be, first of all, the seniority-based wage system penalizes young people because they overpay older people and younger people are underpaid. So over the lifetime, they're paid a fair wage, but they start off being underpaid. So that means young people start off with low incomes. Second, more and more young people are non-regular workers. In Japan, that means you're either fixed term, part-time, or some type of atypical worker like a dispatch worker on call. And so among the 25 to 15 and 24 age cohort, the share went from 20% in 85 up to 50%. And since these are precarious jobs, they could stop anytime, and they're low paid, people don't have the confidence to start a family. There's also increasing wealth inequity among the young age cohorts. The share without any assets, 25 to 35, is increased from 5 to 9%. And finally, there's a question of the hikikomori, the very sad situation of people who do not leave the house. The government estimates that 2% of people 15 to 39 are hikikomori, which means for 6 months they aren't involved in any outside activities. So let me turn to some other issues or explanations for falling fertility. On the left-hand side is a graph showing the relationship between per capita income on the horizontal scale and fertility on the vertical scale. So in 1980, as people became richer, they had fewer children. And people try to explain this, and the two explanations I think make most sense. One is quantity-quality trade-off. As people have more income, they decide they're going to invest heavily in one or a small number of children rather than have more children. And then as income goes up, wages rise. And for women, that means there's a higher opportunity cost of giving a career to raise children. And the other, this is also shown in the positive relationship between a negative relationship up to 1980 in fertility and female employment. So the more women worked, the lower the employment rate. But after 1985 or so, since then, we've seen a positive relationship where as income goes up, fertility goes up, and as female employment goes up, the fertility rate goes up. So this has turned it around. So often when I'd meet government officials, they'd often say, we have to choose female employment or fertility. But actually, they can go together under the right conditions. So this positive relationship is due to the compatibility of female employment and having families. In other words, you have to make it easier to combine paid work and family so that women are not forced to choose between a career and having children. This compatibility of work and family depends on a number of issues. First of all, public social spending, how much government support is there to bear the costs of having children and give it foregoing income for some period of time. And the role of fathers, are they involved in this endeavor? Flexible labor markets. This is a problem in Japan because of this dualism between regular and non-regular. And finally, the social norms. And in Japan, this is a problem because in Japan, mothers tend to be put in charge of the children's education. The Kyo-iku mama situation. So mothers who do work are often viewed as irresponsible because they're not there to participate in their child's education. So in Japan, when people ask, the government asks people, do you think our country is supporting and moving towards a family-friendly society? Only 30% of people said yes. 30% said no. They say 98% said it's very hard to raise children in Japan, whereas in countries, Scandinavia, it might be only 50% say that. And part of the reason is much of the social spending is focused on the elderly. As the elderly population went up, healthcare, long-term care, pension spending, and spending on families stayed rather low. It's gone up from 0.5% towards 2%, but it's only about 28% of what we spend on people 65 and older. So compared to other OECD countries, spending on family support, 1.7% is below the OECD average. The countries at the right end of the scale, Sweden, France is up there. These countries tend to have higher fertility rates. So we look, what is Japan spending money on? How do they go from 0.5 to 1.7? There's two main areas. One is early childhood education and care, but from 0.3% to 0.8%. And I think that's been partially effective. And the other part is child allowance. This money given every month to people with children, 0.1 to 0.4. And that I don't think has been very effective. I'll come back to that in a minute. So basically, the government's been accused of trying to push women to have children. The idea is not to force people, but to allow people to achieve what they would like. So when the government asks people, how many children would you like to have? The figure's gone down. It used to be 2.6. Now it's about 2.3. How many children do you intend to have given your situation? It's still fairly high. It's 2, quite close to replacement. So the question is, why is the birth rate 1.25? What are the obstacles that prevent families from achieving this desired number of children? So the government asks the question, what is stopping you? And the number one reason is the high cost of raising and educating children. So over half of the couples cited that as the major reason. And for me, just talking to my Japanese friends, I'm always struck by how much they spend on education. In fact, Sony Life Insurance took a poll, and a majority of parents, I think it was like 70%, said we're going to spend more on our children's education than we save for our retirement. This is such a high expense item for the family. And one of the reasons is juku, or if you're Korean, hagwon. And so families feel the pressure, and I teach at SAIS, and I have many Chinese students. They say, this is China as well. Many families put their children into these hagwon or juku, 1/3 of primary age students, 1/3 of high school, and half of middle-aged students. This is so they get into a prestigious school. In Tokyo, I read a figure that almost half of middle school students are in private schools, and so that requires juku to get into the better ones. There's many ways to try to get rid of juku. It's necessary to get to universities, but there's 50,000 juku. It's a major industry in Japan. And then in addition to juku, we have private tutoring and distance learning. So the latest estimate done by the government is that the average middle school student goes to juku, they spend 5.5% of their average annual earnings. And so if you have more than one child, I have a close colleague in the Ministry of the Cabinet Office, 3 children, that would be 20% of his income to put his children into JUCO. So he laughingly asked me, which child should not get JUCO? Which ones I not invested? I just don't have the money. So we have to try to reduce the cost, the burden on families. That would improve equity as well, less unfairness in the educational system. The second factor I mentioned, the role of fathers, is difficult in Japan because there's a huge gap between unpaid labor and paid labor. So unpaid labor on the top is taking care of children, cleaning the house, shopping. So in Japan, the average man spends 41 minutes a day on unpaid labor, and the average woman spends 3 hours and 45 minutes. So that's a 3-hour gap. In terms of paid labor, Japanese men are near the top, long working hours. And in addition, they have the long commutes and the after-hour obligations of socializing. So we have this imbalance where women are really focused, bear the burden of unpaid labor, and the men bear the burden of earning the money. And of course, there's studies showing that in countries where the tasks are shared more equally, tend to have higher fertility rates. So how can the government try to encourage a more equal sharing of the burden? Well, that's very difficult. One way would be to have more work-life balance and have more parental leave. What we find is in Scandinavian countries, where 40% or 50% of men take parental leave, once they get involved in the first 2 or 3 months of a baby's life, they tend to stay involved for the rest of the child's time at home. In Japan, the share of men taking parental leave has gone up from 7% to 14%, but still that means only 40% of the parents in Japan who take parental leave are men. In some countries in Scandinavia, it's 40% of those taking parental leave are men. So in Japan, it's still skewed. Men have a right to take 1 year, 12 months of parental leave, but the take-up is very low. So this chart, the men are in green. More than half of the men who take parental leave take less than 2 weeks. And there was a famous politician, his wife had a baby, said, I will take parental leave. And he took one Monday afternoon off for about 3 or 4 weeks. That is his parental leave. It adds up to 1 day, I think. And so why don't men take it? Well, one reason is how much money do you get? In Japan, you start off at 75% of the average wage. Then it goes down to 50. So if you took a year off, you would be paid 61% of your wage. And if you have a mortgage or need income, it's hard to take a big pay cut for that long a time. The other thing is the social pressure. If you tell your boss, I'll be absent for the next 3 or 4 months or a year to take care of a baby, they might not think you're serious about your job. You might not get promotions or advancement in your career. So there's a lot of pressure on the men. In terms of public expenditure in Japan, it's relatively low, about $7,000 for live birth, for maternity leave, and parental leave. So Japan has a large scope to increase this. If you want more men to take parental leave, they probably have to raise the payments during that time. So this is the new plan that came out in June. A lot of details don't seem to be spelled out. One thing, the first item, I won't talk about all these, but child allowance. They want to expand child allowance. And I mentioned I don't think that is very effective. If you look at cross-country comparisons, the elasticity of child allowance to the number of births is very close to zero. The effect is temporary. In fact, in Tokyo, the mayor, she decided to have a Tokyo child allowance. She's going to give 5,000 yen to every parent. And they took a poll and said, what will you spend your extra 5,000 yen a month on? And nobody said, I'm going to have another baby. They said, we're going to give our child a better juku, or more lessons, or more activities, more trips. So it doesn't really change parents' decision giving these child allowance. I think we need child allowance to try to reduce child poverty. So they should be targeted on families where the children live in relative poverty, income below 50%. The other thing was the quality of childcare. And I think that's very important. The capacity has risen by about 40% over the past 10 years. The number of babies is dropping. So outside of the major cities, we have excess capacity. So it's not a question of more childcare, except maybe in Tokyo or Osaka. That the question is the quality, the number of children per carer or teacher. And there the problem really is lack of labor. 2.5 job offer to applicant ratio because it's a low-paid, non-regular job, and not enough people are doing it. The other thing was parental leave. The government set a target that 14% of men took leave in 2022. The target is 30% for 2025. They want an 85% target by 2030. Again, how do they get there? They can't just force men to leave the company. They're going to have to spend more money, making it less financially difficult for parents, and it goes for women as well, to take longer parental leave. So basically, for fertility, financial position of young people, reducing costs of children, increasing the role of fathers. The fourth point, which I'll talk about now in terms of female employment, is this labor market dualism. So in Japan, people still say women are underrepresented in the labor force. Actually, the female employment rate went up from 60% in 2012 to 72%. So it's above the OECD average. That reflects severe labor shortages in Japan. When people say women are underrepresented, well, they've increased their employment. The employment gender gap is about 11 points. So it's about the OECD average, which means there's room for more growth in female employment, but it's not an outlier like it might have been in the past. The real problem is the gender wage gap is extremely large, about 23% between men and women. This is for full-time workers. And so this is something that discourages women, since more and more women, the university graduation rate is almost the same for men and women. That women are paid 23% less. Many educated women will say, no thanks, it's not worth my time. So we look at non-regular worker problem. So among women, the share who are non-regular workers went up from about 1/3 back in the 80s to more than half. And among men is about 22%. So this is a serious problem because non-regular work means it's precarious, and it also means much lower wages. And this is concentrated among married women. So if you look at single women, about 80% are regular workers between 25 and 30, and 10% are non-regular, and 10% are the brown line, not in the labor force. Like married women, most women, 70% are out of the labor force, given the tradition of leaving when you get married or have a child. And about 15% each are either regular or non-regular. So over time, women come back in the labor force as the children grow up, but they're not hired as regular, the blue line, they're hired as non-regular. So the share of women who are non-regular rises steadily in these jobs. So many educated women choose not to participate because it's not worth their while. So this is a wage gap between regular and non-regular per hour. Over time, with seniority-based wages, regular workers get more and more, non-regular workers stay stagnant. And this excludes bonus payments. The gap would be even larger if we had bonus payments included in here. So Prime Minister Abe said we're going to get rid of non-regular work. We're going to sweep this term away from the country. And he didn't have much success. Basically, just to summarize quickly, companies hired non-regular because it gives them flexibility. It means when the business cycle goes bad, you can dismiss or fire staff. You have to fire a non-regular worker because the regular workers are protected by employment protection. Also, they're cheaper because you don't have to pay social insurance, pension, the employment insurance, the healthcare, the long-term care. And so just skipping ahead to the end, basically what I've argued for 25 years is you have to have a comprehensive strategy to raise the coverage of social insurance for non-regular and training since the companies won't train them, and then reduce employment protection for regular workers. Of course, when I visit Rengo or labor unions, this is a very sore point. They want labor protection, but I argue the best approach would be flexicurity. This is what Denmark does. You protect the workers and you don't just protect the job, which could disappear and the worker can leave the labor force, get trained, and come back and do something different. So another problem is discrimination. In 2000, Japan said women will have 30% of leadership positions by 2020. And you can see in 2021, it was only 13%. Women, since they leave the labor force for children, they don't have tenure that's long enough, and they don't put in the long hours. There's sort of a mommy trap, and also now a daddy trap, as my friend said. And so now women are still discriminated against. If you look at the diet, 10% are female. Look at corporate boards of directors, 4% are women. The government, only 4% of senior directors are women. So there is a discrimination problem, partly because of dualism and partly just discrimination. And finally, this is a complicated issue, but there's a tax deduction for spouses and exemption from social insurance. So if you are a second earner in a family and you earn less than 1.5 million, then the main earner gets a tax deduction. And if you are also the second earner and you earn less than 1.06 million annually, then this is like what, $10,000. Then you don't have to pay social insurance, pensions, health and care, long-term care, what have you. And so if we got rid of that, women would come into the labor force. They would work longer hours, or they would start working. So according to an estimate by Kitao Sensei at Todai, Tokyo University, the employment rate, if you got rid of the spouse deduction, would go up 7 points. And if you got rid of the social insurance exemption, it would go up by 7 points. This would influence married women. These are the second earners who either don't work or stay home because of these incentives. Why don't we get rid of them? Well, they're very popular. For women who want to stay home, or husbands who want to have their women wife stay home, this means more money. So it's very popular, hard to get rid of. Let me say just a few words about older people, how we get them to work. Over time, the employment rates for older people trended down. Fewer self-employed, more generous pension payments. Then since about 2000, we've seen an upward trend for 55, 59, all the way up to 70, 74, because older people are better educated, they're healthier, jobs are less labor intensive, and the pension eligibility age has gone up. So we see this upward trend in employment. And there's been a change in people's attitude. The government says, how long do you want to work? About 30% of people at age 60 said, I just want to keep working as long as I can. Another 25% say, I want to work to age 70. The problem is companies still set mandatory retirement. So the share setting mandatory retirement is edged up from 91% to 94%. And the age at which they set mandatory retirement, it can't be below 60, but the share that's set at 60 is still very high at 70%. That means more than 2/3 of companies force people to retire at age 60. Given Japan's long life expectancy and long healthy life expectancy, longest in the world, it's very irrational to make people leave at 60, which can be your prime productivity areas, prime of life for many people. And so people are forced out by mandatory retirement. Why do we have mandatory retirement? Well, we have seniority-based wages. So in Japan, the link between age and tenure and wage is the strongest among the 38 OECD countries. It's particularly strong in large companies. It's stronger for men and women, and it's stronger for highly educated people. What it means is when you join a company, you have a low wage, and as you work, your productivity goes up. And eventually, it surpasses your wage, and companies want to get rid of you once your productivity falls below your wage. Once your productivity gets below your wage, then the company wants to get rid of you. So mandatory retirement is how they get people to leave, since they can't really fire them because of employment protection. They want mandatory retirement. And so the workers want to continue. In 2013, the government made a new law that's saying that workers who want to continue at age 60 have the right to work for 5 years. But what happens is the regular lifetime contract stops, you get rehired as non-regular. And so most of the people who stay past 60 become non-regular. So among men at 55 to 59, 11% were non-regular. And once they get to 60, 64, it's over half, and it keeps going up after that. And so the wage drops. Only 18% keep their wage. The rest take a fairly significant wage cut. So you want to have more older people work. You don't demote them and cut their salaries when they hit age 60. So basically, if we want to get these people to work, we have to, first of all, abolish the right of mandatory retirement. I would say just make it illegal. In the U.S., it's age discrimination. In many European countries, you can't make people retire because of age. Second, the pension eligibility age is too low. It's not even 65 yet. It'll be 65 for men in 2025 and 2030 for women. In Japan's life expectancy, it should be going towards 70, like in many other OECD countries. Wages should give more weight to your performance, your job type, and less to seniority. It's hard for the government to interfere in wage setting, but the government can set the example. And they're starting to do it because they said now workers can go to 65. They had 1 more year every 2 years till they get to 65. The problem is they cut their wages by 30%. So that's not a very big encouragement. So if you're a civil servant, you might not want to stay on. And finally, we need more lifelong training and education. There's a book called The 100-Year Life that you might have read. And basically, the idea in Japan, there's a figure saying that out of children born in 2007, half will reach the age of 109. And so what you learn when you're in high school or in college isn't going to last if you work until you might be 75 or 80 in this 100-year lifestyle. So you're going to have to be retrained during your lifetime. So I'm not arguing that we should have men and women conform to the traditional pattern. The idea is that traditional Japanese employment practices are out of date. They worked when we had a rapidly growing economy, rapidly growing labor force, but they don't work in this 100-year age of life. Let me just say a couple words about foreign workers, since this is a growing area. So everyone thinks Japan's a closed economy. They don't want foreigners. They want a homogeneous society. There have been a number of polls. The Pew Center for Research, they did a poll, and 58% of Japanese want foreign workers to keep coming in at the same pace. 23% want more to come in. Nikkei did a survey, and people said Japan's better because of more foreign workers. So Japan is changing its view. This isn't immigration, but this is opening up to foreign workers. You look at the foreign population in Japan, it's tripled in the past 30 years. The black area is Korean, the light blue is Chinese. So about half of these people are from Southeast Asia, and counting the other Asia, it's mainly Asian. These are people who have mainly permanent residence, partly the Nikkei gene, the people from South America who came back to Japan. In terms of the foreign-born population, Japan is very low. Only 2.3% of the population is foreign-born. Japan is now a net immigration country. The green line shows net immigration. So it took off in 2012. It was rising to 200,000 a year. It fell because of the pandemic. It's going back. So Japan is now a country that is attracting foreign residents. And the Japanese net immigration or immigration is basically flat. So this is contributing to the labor force. About 2.3% of the labor force is now foreign workers. So it's doubled since 2015, from about 0.9 million to 1.8 million. So the blue line is the permanent people. The Nikkei gene, this would be Brazilians who come back or thousands of Japanese. The orange is skilled workers. That's about 500,000. The gray area, non-qualified, these are basically students who come on an education visa, and then they do arobaito. They work typically in a convenience store or some other job for up to 8 hours a week. And the green line is the trainees, the technical intern training program. This technical intern training program has become, to be honest, an embarrassment for Japan. So people are brought in to work for 3 years with another family. They can't change jobs, and the employers can take advantage of them because they can't change jobs. They have their passport. And so even the government has talked about this as a human rights issue. So Japan needs to take policies to try to improve the quality of life for immigrants. This is a competition with Korea, with Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. They're all facing labor shortages. And so Japan's going to have to compete to try to get the best people to come. So when you look at Japan's policies, they rank relatively low in terms of education for immigrants, in terms of housing, discrimination. Basically, they have a new plan called Promoting Harmonious Coexistence with Foreigners. So the idea is integration is coexistence. It sounds like the Cold War for people my age. Then we also have to think about how to train them better. So there's a breakthrough program. This is a real change. The Specified Skilled Worker Program allows foreigners to come to Japan in 12 business lines with labor shortages. These are low-skilled or medium-skilled workers. So for the first time, low-skilled, medium-skilled workers can work in Japan on a work visa, not as a permanent resident, not as a trainee, not as a university student. They can come to Japan and work. So the government in 2019 said will allow 345,000 people by end of fiscal 23, which is next March. Because of the pandemic, we only had about 120,000 come in. So it's in a struggle to get all these positions filled. And my nightmare is Japan opens the door and nobody comes. Not enough people come. So Japan has to compete to try to get these people into Japan. At the same time, wages in Japan are relatively low compared to many other advanced countries. And with the weak yen, if you're working to support a family in Vietnam or the Philippines, the weak yen at 145, 150 means your remittances to your home don't go very far. And we also have to improve the environment for highly educated people. This is always a measure of the opportunities. Let me just say 2 words on the conclusion. So these are the summary that I made. So in this scenario, if we have the baseline, that's the black line. If we manage to do all those reforms where we raise the employment rate of women to the level of men, if we double immigration or foreign workers to 200,000 per year, and if we have older workers have employment rates going towards younger cohorts, we could boost that working force to 42 million. On the other hand, we could also boost it to 42 million just by raising fertility to 1.8. But since fertility is something we don't really understand how to influence through economic means, I think we really have to focus on these labor market reforms while trying to do something about fertility. And if we did both, then we could have a population or employment, a labor force of 52 million. And finally, the key story, even more so than labor force, is productivity. Japan, despite all its advantages of R&D, high education, all the things they have, productivity per hour worked is 30% below the top half of OECD countries. So there's a huge scope to raise productivity. And finally, Abenomics wanted to double it to 2%. We got 1% OECD average. That 1% we're not going to converge productivity in other countries. So Japan has a lot to do on productivity, but that's a whole different lecture. So I'll stop there and we'll talk about your question. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that talk. And once again, it's just an enormous amount of information and great analysis and things like that. So we're going to start our question and answer session, but I'm going to just get things going by starting with a question. So around 25 years ago, when I just arrived at slightly before I arrived at Columbia, I started on a project which was either a big success or a big failure, in the sense that I made a 100-year forecast of the Japanese economy. And at that time, I believe that the fertility rate was around 1.3 or 1.4 births per woman. And I put up a graph in that paper, which looked a lot like your graph, which was it was a J curve, in which you kind of saw for low income countries, as you increased per capita income, fertility fell, and then once you got above some threshold, fertility started to rise with GDP per capita. And Japan was exactly at the bottom of that picture. And I was a little disheartened to see 25 years later, Japan's still at the bottom of that picture, and the hope is higher per capita incomes. But on some level, what I began to wonder about as I was looking at your picture is, to what extent is this a problem that is due to the failure of the Japanese economy to generate high-income jobs, and that it is not Japan is not unique in having fertility rates that are below 2. Indeed, most of the world lives in countries with low fertility rates, but Japan is unique in that it's gotten so low. So is this just another symptom of low productivity growth in Japan?
Right, you're exactly right. I mean, we're 30% below in terms of productivity, and wages are determined by productivity. So if we could have a productivity revolution, then young people would have the incomes that would give them the confidence to start off. But I think productivity is really the fundamental issue. And as economists, that's what we study and we understand. This fertility stuff is interesting, but there's so much sociology involved. I feel like I'm kind of on soft ground. The other question I always get, is this an East Asian problem? I thought you were going to ask me that. And because we see the lowest rates, we see Korea is the lowest, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan. So I don't know if it's an East Asian problem, but I think one of the problems in East Asia is the gender roles are so strictly segmented that it makes it harder for women to combine the two. So with more women in East Asia say, I'm going to have to choose the career option, leaving fewer women to choose the family option.